Hi, I'm Claudia Lehmann. I'm an artist, spatial practitioner and researcher working at the intersections of currents between high atmosphere and deep subsurface. So at the residency, I've started off with field work, working around the island. I've looked at different hydrological clusters that have focused around the Akrotiri Peninsula. So I started off collecting salt samples and photographs. We also went into the mountains to look at copper heritage sites, thinking about this wider trade history on the island and how that's now fed into the hydrological colonialism. I've then brought this work back into the space here, and actually in my bathroom at home, developing photographs using salt water, and then etched plates with salt water as well. So using a 9-volt battery to create copper etched plates, and then using the double drum press here and the laser engraver, laser cutter to make a map of hydrogeocultural relations. The map was laser engraved looking at these 3 different parts of information. So the first layer is about the unseen aquifers. The second layer is looking at how we access water on the surface. And then the third layer is looking at the atmosphere, and that's not just like the weather atmosphere, but it's the atmosphere between people through land relations and different sorts of touristic interfaces. So looking at the golf course and the casino there, and how they play part of this hydrological landscape, which not only draws on the space here, but also from afar. So through the diets and the water usage for the golf course, the pools, that sort of thing. The first line of the EU Water Framework Directive, which is a water governance policy that is extended across the whole of the EU, says something along the lines of water is not a commercial product, but a heritage that should be protected, defended and treated as such. Can't quite remember it, but along those lines. The basis of this residency was examining if water is a heritage and it's being degraded through saltwater intrusion, then what does that mean for our heritage as people? I'm framing this heritage of the island around copper because that's, Cyprus gave its name to copper itself, and there's a long-lasting history of this trade of copper which connected it to other Mediterranean islands and beyond. And so using that as a stand-in for the water, because water is now commodified and traded. I see the saltwater intrusion of aquifers, and this is where the title of the project comes from, brackish registers, not only as a geochemical process, but this intrusion on heritage and heritage building. And so that's why I've used the material processes of the saltwater degrading the photographic film, and you can see the pitting and the clouding on it. It's got this weird tension, right? It degrades the image, but also salt can be used as a preserving agent. So there's this kind of counterpoint between the two. And I've been investigating that. Salt was one of the first photographic methods, and I use it as a fix in my own practice. Salt prints, and then there's photogravure, which was using a light sensitive emulsion on copper plates, and so I'm examining photography's role within this extractive landscape as well. The map, I was interested in seeing this different layer of information and how it's read. When you move around it, different things reveal themselves, which I find very interesting, and it's the same as walking through a landscape. You don't get the full picture, which also was kind of drawing on this idea of an embodied photographic practice. I've shot through some of the plants and using the salt and taking a real intimacy with the site. Certain things come into focus and certain things are pushed back. So it was interesting exploring that through the mapping as well. The installation of the prints, I've specifically hung them in a way that they're countering each other. So if one is low, the other one is high, and they kind of move around in counterpoint with one another. And that is kind of exploring this tension that I've referenced earlier about salt as a preserving agent and as a degradation tool, looking at water as commercial product and as a heritage, the different forms of land use of, in Akrotiri, it's a British overseas territory. And so they, in their accounts, they have said, you know, this salt lake they've preserved as a biodiversity, sort of that kind of like nature reserve. But also the British had a great role in taking and exporting other people's heritage historically. So kind of dealing with these tensions between what is preserved and what is sold and traded and commodified. The etching plates, so they actually all form part of this map. If you combine them all together, you'd be able to grid them out. So that's how they came together. And then with each of those different plates, I kind of examined, okay, what's going on in this quadrant? And either had some more illustrative drawings or more graphic taking from the mapping that I've done. And the mapping was built up of lots of different hydrological data, and obviously because it was in the British overseas territory, there are quite a few sources of data that I could draw on, which have been mapped historically, and I found data that goes back to the 1880s, I think. So over, 150 years. I think about my collaboration with Christos Soumides. His research focuses on green and blue water. So that's the green water is held within the landscape, and that's what the ecosystem draws on, and the blue water is kind of engineered. And then we looked at the virtual water. So this is water that's imported from other places, and so he's done research around different diets at hotel buffets, and the American diet, which is very red meat heavy, is the most freshwater intensive, and that's not only freshwater that's located here, but is also around water that is imported through the feed. And you'll see on my work, there's two different graphical representations, and this is looking at where water comes from and its usage. And it was quite shocking processing this data because it's something that feels intangible. And I guess this relates to the invisible waters theme. The invisible water is not only underground, but comes from other people's rain in other communities that are also potentially water scarce.